let me just do a quick introduction to what we're here for, what we're talking about. And Martyn is a mad, keen explorer, adventurer, and is joining us on the eve of departing for the Canary Islands when he is going to set to sea or put to sea for a 3,000-mile, give or take, row from the Canary Islands across to the Caribbean. So he's rowing alone across the Atlantic in the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, which is a race which he'll give us more detail on, but I think about 30 or so boats. And so we'll learn about his aspirations, ambitions for the race, how he got there, what the training was like, and so on and so forth. My background was relevant, I suppose, because ocean rowing happens to weirdly be one of my passions. I was obsessed with it as a sport from the age of 13, give or take, having read about the exploits of some of the original rowers, the likes of Peter Bird and John Fairfax, and the Norwegians before them, Harbo and Samuelson, who were the first sort of modern day ocean rowers, if you like. Anyway, enough about history. Here we are with Martyn, and Martyn, it'd be great to understand, some of your background.
Sure.
Understand, is this your sort of first adventure? Are you a great seafarer, a salty sea dog, or is this all new territory?
I wouldn't know. Well, I wouldn't classify myself as a salty sea dog, Ollie, but and I'm not a sailor either. This is my first foray into ocean rowing. It may or may not be my last. There may be others. But actually, in terms of adventure, this is one in a series of endurance events that I've undertaken and will undertake. So I suppose how you would describe me is that adventure is my blood, and it just, whatever the adventure that pops up or whichever attracts my attention is where I tend to focus my activity for that period of time. So it's something that's probably been around an awfully long time. I've just got more time in my hands now to undertake them and fulfill that level of stupidity, as a lot of people say to me.
Excellent. Well, I'm very envious that you'll be taking on a month or two at sea, whereas I will be a month or two at my desk. A far harder endurance task, I would argue.
Well, possibly, although I think a month would be a really tall order for me, because as you probably know, I'm 62. I'm doing it as part of the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, but I'm doing it as a solo. And what I'd ideally like to do is do it in probably 60 days or less, because for me, for my generation and age range, anything under 60 days, I think there's a good chance I might achieve a world record. I'm not sure if that's quite the record, but to say do it in 30 days, I'd probably have to be a lot younger, a lot bigger, and a lot more motivated, I think.
Well, let's wind back a bit, Martyn, for the benefit of the listeners who are not familiar with the weird sport that is ocean rowing, and also to understand a little bit about you, about Martyn the man, and perhaps you could give us some background. I don't think this is your first foray into adventure, and I know that you've undertaken some long endurance challenges in the past. So it'd be great to get a little bit of background to you, the man, how you came into some of these endurance challenges. So I guess, what was your life sort of growing up? Were you a businessman? Were you in industry? And how did you fall into endurance?
I suppose it's a long, convoluted story, but I can summarize it fairly quickly because it's relevant to people at younger generations, people my generation. I probably always had the desire to undertake these sorts of challenges when I was younger, but it was very greatly overshadowed by a very serious episode of clinical depression when I was in my late teens, right through my early mid-20s, to the point where it was incredibly difficult for me to function, hold down jobs, relationships, the whole 9 yards of just really being able to, I suppose, develop and grow your life. Took me a long time to resolve that, took me a long time to get to the situation where I felt comfortable with myself, but comfortable with what I wanted to do. And I think one of the reasons that I've started to take on a lot more of these challenges, and certainly when you're involved with sponsors and promotional activity, you get asked an awful lot. Well, what is the real motivation behind this? And I've had to spend a lot of time exploring that, understanding it. For me, the phrase I use is unfulfilled potential, and it goes right back to that time when I suffered with that mental health problem. That I probably always had the desire, but it was so far buried and so far hidden that the potential just wasn't there. And having gone through that process, I now have the confidence, the mental stamina, however you would describe that, to actually undertake those or fulfill that potential. So that's where a lot of the motivation comes from. And over I would say probably the last 20 years, the amount of endurance activities have extended and evolved, so canoeing down the River Wye, extensive walks through the wilds of the UK, and further afield, Everest Base Camp, hiking in Nepal. All of those things have gradually become more and more extensive, more and more intense. And again, people would say why? And actually, for me, there's a massive amount of enjoyment, but there's also a massive amount of or the several messages that I can actually give back to people. And some of those messages are very much in the I'm an ordinary person. I've had difficult times, but actually, if somebody like me who there's nothing really special about, can actually overcome and develop further from that, then why can't you? There's a message there that says anybody at any age can, with the right support and help, overcome an awful lot of difficulty, an awful lot of problems, and actually thrive. So, if I can say to my existing generation, which was a generation that really did not talk about mental health, particularly male mental health, look, here I am. I've gone through that. I've come out the other side of it, and I'm actually having a blast. I'm having a great time. And a lot of it is, the more extreme the challenge, the more I enjoy myself. Bit of a long-winded response, but I think there's some key points, some key elements in that are very relevant to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Oh, fantastic. And obviously, having gone through that sort of mental anguish and challenge in your younger years, this will probably be like child's play by comparison. The solitude, isolation.
I'd like, yeah.
Although different, there's definitely parallels.
It's certainly,
right?
yeah. I think it's different. What is the difference, or how does that all benefit? Well, I think for me, when you've had to go to, I suppose those dark places that we all have and sometimes don't particularly want to visit, and you've had to do it on a regular basis, you get to know yourself incredibly well. You get to know what motivates you. You get to know what scares you. You get to know how you interact with other people. You get to know every facet about your personality and your character. And some of it's not nice, some of it's very nice. But what you take from that then enables you to, I suppose, push yourself beyond where you ever thought possible. And when you do that, the amount of personal satisfaction that you get back, and additional self-belief, self-motivation is phenomenal. It's a self-fulfilling circle. The more you do, the better you feel. The better you feel, the more you do, and so forth. And if it's a message that I can put out to people, particularly who may now be having their own mental health challenges, that you can get through this. It may take a while. Certainly find help and support. But here's an example of what you can achieve when you come out the other side. And it's pretty good.
And come through stronger, hopefully. Obviously, a lot of sort of parallels with weightlifting or a military style of training, right?
Very much
break
so.
you down and build you up.
Yeah.
Fascinating sidetrack, and I guess something that perhaps we didn't expect would come up in a conversation about the Atlantic rowing race, but fascinating to understand that background and how you've arrived. At the sort of start line of the race.
And there have been other challenges too. I mean, the previous one, which is really what led me to undertake this one, but the previous one was back in 2017, and I took 5 months off, and I wilderness hiked from the Mexican border all the way through America to the Canadian border, which is through the deserts of California, the Sierra Nevada mountains, the forests of Oregon, and the wilds of Washington State. Almost 3,000 miles, totally on my own, everything for survival, food, shelter, clothing, carried on my back. Walking on average 20 miles a day, 6-7 days a week. Absolutely loved it. The silence and the solitude that came with that was probably something that very few people experience. And how did that lead to ocean rowing, which is clearly what we're talking about here? I have a strange memory that I think somebody said to me, when you finish the walk, will you do any more walks? And I said, well, probably the only walk I want to do is around my garden, but maybe I'll row an ocean. Now, I have no idea where that statement came from. Absolutely none. But a year later, 2018, I was feeling the twitchy feet, or there's something I need to think about planning or doing. The thought about rowing an ocean popped into my head from, I have no idea where, probably that original thought a year or so ago. And I thought, I'll just have a look at ocean rowing. And I knew within less than 5 minutes, when I came across ocean rowing generally, and then the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, I just knew that's it. I will be doing that. And I haven't questioned that decision or that desire for the last 2 years. I've certainly questioned my sanity, and I've certainly questioned, the difficulty in the task of actually preparation, but never have I heard myself say, I'm not sure I want to do this. It's just never popped into my consciousness, which is a good thing, because I'm 9 days away now from actually starting the row and heading out from La Gomera. And on Thursday, I'll be getting on a plane to go out there. So it's pretty close. So it's probably just as well that I'm, I can't wait.
You'll never regret it. That's what life's for.
Yeah.
So let's give people a bit of understanding about the race. What is the race? Just boil it down into its bare bones. How does it work?
Okay, well,
how many people?
Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge has been running for quite a number of years. It's an organised race sponsored by Talisker Whiskey, obviously. It runs from the Canaries, La Gomera specifically, all the way to Antigua. It takes place this time of the year, December, because it tends to follow the southerly ocean currents and the southerly trade winds. So you start to row more southeasterly to begin with, pick up the southerly trade winds, which then swing you back up towards Antigua. It's a slightly quieter route from a shipping point of view, which is pretty important when you're in a small ocean rowing boat. On average, takes teams of 4, anything from 30 to 40 days. Teams of 3 slightly longer, teams of 2, a little bit longer, and solos a little bit longer still. This year is probably, or I'm sure will go down in the records as being probably one of the most challenging, more from the point of actually getting to the start line than anything else, and that's clearly because of what's happened with COVID-19. It's been incredibly difficult for a lot of teams to undertake all their practice, their duration, all the race requirements. So the actual number of teams would have been about 32, 33 this year, and it's down to 21. And that's exceptional circumstances. Why am I doing it as part of a race? Quite simply, for me, it's a combination of risk negation and enjoyment. I want to make sure that I have the best possible crossing, and that's both from an enjoyment point of view, but also from a risk reduction point of view. I want to make sure that I have undertaken all of the necessary training, the rigors of just practicing in the boat, the knowledge that I know how to navigate, I know every part of my equipment, because I've had to prove that to other people who are experienced ocean rowers. Otherwise, what would I be doing if I just got in the boat and set off? I'd probably be risking an awful lot of my own life and possibly other people's as well. So for me, that's a fairly clear reason for doing it as part of the race.
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting analogy that, you referenced the trade winds and the southerly currents, or the westerly currents, but you need ocean rowing. I was likened to hot air ballooning, that, the rower can do so much, but if you cannot fight the winds and the currents. That's what sort of people
Yeah.
don't always understand. So a trade wind route like the Canaries to the Caribbean is almost the ideal route for a rowing race.
So and I should have said west rather than east, Ollie. I do remember that now. I know which direction I'm going.
West.
Yeah, west.
50-50.
Yeah, well, make sure I get it right.
And what about the boat itself? Martyn, talk us a little bit through the boat. It's sort of how long it is. And
I mean, ocean rowing boats are made to be incredibly robust, as you will know from your own experiences, and they're continually evolving. They are fundamentally all self-righting for the obvious reason that you need to be absolutely comfortable that should you get into a mess in terms of adverse weather, that the boat is fundamentally safe. Mine is a solo version, has one rowing position. It's approximately 24 foot long by about 4 foot wide, with a larger front cabin, which has my sleeping arrangements, my navigation equipment, my water maker, and a lot more comfort than perhaps a pairs or a fours, purely because there's more space. It also has a rear cabin that really is just more storage and houses auto helm and various other pieces of equipment. But for me as a solo, with that particular version of the boat, it's pretty luxurious, which is probably a strange word to use. But if you look at some of the other pairs boats or fours, and you will know this, it can be pretty crammed. I've only got myself to fall out with. Yeah, there's only me I can fall out with, and I can talk to myself, as long as I like, and nobody's actually going to say anything critical. So there is a benefit doing it solo. There are disadvantages. It takes longer, and you've got to be much more self-reliant. But that's part of the reason I'm doing it solo.
I disagree. I'd say there's no disadvantages. It's all upside going on your own. There's no one to fall out with. It takes longer. The fact it takes longer is a benefit. You get better value for money.
Yeah,
and so do all your sponsors.
No, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
But I know your boat well, and I'm very envious. I think you've got the absolute Rolls Royce of the ocean rowing boats. The state of the art machine.
I am very, very happy with it. And this is one of the things that when people say, aren't you scared or will you be scared? And of course, the answer is I would be foolish if I said I was never going to be scared because that's just being, that's too much bravado. Undoubtedly, there are times when I'm going to be pretty scared, almost terrified. Where are the things that make a difference to me? Well, it is the fact that I've done a massive amount of training, something like 200 hours on the ocean, bobbing around on the North Sea, which is probably not the best part of the UK coast to practice on, sitting off Clacton Pier, at night in rolling waves. Yeah, you wonder why you would do that. Portland, all around the south coast there, fantastic locations. But what has it taught me? I know, the boat's capabilities. I know what the boat will do in certain conditions. I also know, equally importantly, what I'm likely to do in certain conditions. And there will be times when I'll be panicking or flapping, but will I be concerned that the boat can't cope with it? No. So that's, if you like, one of the ticks in the box. It's more down to how I am going to react in those situations, but with the comfort that I have a very, very good piece of kit. And I've trained on it, and I understand how to use it, and I'm not afraid of it, which is pretty crucial, I think.
And you're obviously no stranger to endurance, Martyn, given your walk from Mexico up to Canada.
Yeah.
And how would you sort of run your routine? Presumably, you're not rowing 12 hours a day straight. Are you doing 2 hours on, 2 hours off around the clock, or how do you envisage your sort of daily schedule working?
I probably haven't. I'm going to give myself flexibility. I think if you're a team of 2, 3, or 4, there is usually a greater requirement for some sort of schedule. So 2 hours on, 2 hours off, change of team. I think for a solo, you have that privilege of being more flexible, and I may well choose a 2 hour on, 2 hour off, or I may choose a 3 or a 4 hour on, or I may choose to row most of the day and sleep a good chunk of the night. What I'm saying to myself, and this experience really comes from the hike, is that the minute you set off, your planning goes out the window. It's as simple as that. You have a plan which you need, but the conditions, circumstances will undoubtedly conspire to force you to change that plan. And adaptability is probably more important than actually having a plan. It's being able to say, well, okay, conditions are brilliant, so I am going to row for 4 or 5 hours with a short break because I can use the conditions to make miles. Or conditions are terrible, I'm just going to put out the power anchor, which is the piece of kit you know about, and sit in the cabin and have some food, because that's the best thing to do, rather than row against the conditions, exhaust myself, and then have a further problem or not be able to row as well when the weather or the conditions are better for me.
Yeah, I think that's a key takeaway, isn't it? That management of boat, self, and equipment is absolutely key. And part of that is not rowing blindly against the wind, because that's like
you're going nowhere
to hold up the sky.
Yeah. You're going nowhere. I mean, this. There's a certain speed of wind and conditions that means you are just rowing into a brick wall, and you will just exhaust yourself and get frustrated. So you might as well just stop and wait for the conditions to improve.
And the power anchor is a niche but vital piece of kit. Certainly, it was my best friend. I think I would say arguably the most important bit of kit you carry on the boat. And it's basically it's a drag device which you put out, and it stops you going backwards essentially. And it's a parachute which floats just below the surface, fills with water as your boat is pulled back, and the resistance inflates the parachute. Yeah, and it'll slow your drift down to around half a knot or a knot. And I used to put it out even if I was stopping for half an hour or so, anything to negate that drift.
There is nothing worse than you see the distance, the miles click off, and then you stop, or you have a break, and suddenly you've got to row three miles that you did again. Psychologically, mentally, that's tough. Because you feel like going backwards, and actually you have. So you could do it again. Yeah.
I think the worst amount of ground I lost was 35 miles, but equally the best day I made 75 in drift over a series of stormy days. So I guess we're ticking through the traits needed for the ideal ocean row, and you got the endurance box checked with this with your walk from Mexico, and presumably that covered off isolation to some extent. Although I imagine then you would have been meeting people along the trail and through towns and whatnot.
Yeah, it was an interesting one hiking, because I set out to do it on my own. It is a trail that is used by other people, so you do meet people. You tend to meet them occasionally when you stop for the evening, so you might turn up at a campsite or find somewhere to camp, and there's possibly one or two people there. But by and large, from the moment you wake up and pack up and go, you are on your own. The isolation of that I found incredibly therapeutic. There were often times when I was probably 3 or 4 days in any direction away from any real civilization. So there was a lot of self-reliance. And I think one of the things that I found most enjoyable was the silence and the solitude. And what do I mean by that? Well, many times I'd be walking along, and the only thing I could actually hear were my footfalls crunching on the path in front of me, and either the whisper of the wind or the rustle of the trees, or just nothing, just absolute silence. There were some stunning days with weather. There were some incredibly bad days, but the solitude that arrives with that and the silence that comes with it is something that I'd never experienced before, and I found it. It was like a food for the soul, which, without getting too deep about it, there was a real. It was almost like a personal type of therapy that I could just walk. I was doing something very basic. You're just walking for 20 miles a day, for 6 or 7 days a week, one foot in front of the other. And where does your mind go? How do you prepare for that isolation? And in fact, my mind went all over the place. And there were many times when I would have probably been walking for 3 or 4 hours and I couldn't actually remember anything that I'd been thinking about. I think a psychologist would probably say you were living very much in the moment, that you were just so aware of the current circumstances. There was nothing else to actually involve yourself with or take note of, and actually your mind's as free as it wants to go. How did I feel that? Well, I didn't use music. I find music a distraction at that time, because it actually undermines the enjoyment of the peace and quiet. And it was probably that experience that went a long way to mentally prepare me for this row. There are going to be periods of isolation, literally from the time I set off. Am I concerned about it? Not really, or not at all, because I've been there. I know how I react to that isolation. Yes, I'll be able to contact, family or whatever in at certain times, but it's the knowledge of how you react in certain circumstances that I think gives you the confidence or a level of comfort that you'll be okay. So there were instances when I was hiking that were incredibly dangerous. It was one of the worst years for snow and ice and swollen rivers that they'd had in 30 years. So many river crossings were torrents. Many of the mountains that should have been free of snow and ice were ice chutes. So you had to learn to mountaineer, and you're on your own. So you learn very quickly where your boundaries are, both physically and mentally. But of course, if you're 3 or 4 days away in any direction from civilization, you've got a choice. You either go back or you go forward, and nobody likes to go back, so you go forward. And it's just understanding how you deal with it. You might have to take a bit more time. You might have to scream at the world, shout in a hollow, lose whatever. And believe me, I did. But it's knowing how you cope, and knowing the tools you have, I think, is fundamental to hopefully enjoying what I'm going to do in the very imminent future.
Yeah, I think it's very meditative, isn't it? A lot of many endurance sports have that similarity, don't they? Whether it's walking one foot in front of the other, or rowing and pulling the oars stroke after stroke, it is that meditation and that sort of blind focus in a way.
Yes, and you will notice that when you're rowing, there's a cadence that you get to that you just keep doing it. You just keep doing it, and yes, you may listen to music, you may just have conversations with yourself, whatever works.
Oh, fantastic! You're really making me increasingly envious as our conversation unfolds, Martyn. And to that end, I think one of the highlights of being alone at sea, much like whether it's time in the military or mountaineering, one of the highlights must be food. And I'm intrigued to know what food you're taking.
Well, most of it is actually going to be rehydrated. I think that's,
I know, but I want the absolute detail, Martyn. Okay. I love dehydrated food.
Right. Well, is it going to be a highlight? Good question. I have to say, when I was hiking, I actually loved the rehydrated food. I did love it. I probably ate my way through more Snickers bars and Mars bars than you could shake a big stick at, to the point where I probably still struggle to eat them. However, I have to carry 85 days worth of food, and the daily calorie intake is based on my body weight. So I have to have 60 calories per kilogram of body weight. So for me, that's 4,200 calories per day. Now, if you've ever actually seen a 1 day's rehydrated food or high calorific food, it's a massive amount of snacks, nuts, chocolate, all the stuff that by and large would be probably a treat for your children. But you can actually gorge yourself on probably a year's worth in 24 hours. You can take on that much. And I think in the first week or so, I will load up with as much fresh food as I can potentially carry. But quite quickly, I will just be boiling water, shoving it into a bag, and eating with a spoon. And that's probably it.
And what manufacturer have you got? Which food supplier
I've
have you
got a
gone with?
combination actually. Expedition Foods is one, and Active Eat is the other. Active Eat. Oh, and then there's a couple of others for the wet rations. You have to have the emergency wet rations, which I think I can't remember the name of those. Active Eat is an
It's
interesting.
Wayfarer.
Wayfarer, yes, Wayfarer, yeah. Active Eat is interesting. It's a company set up by a previous year's rower. The lady that set that up, I think, rowed in 2018, and I think she didn't enjoy the type of food that was available at the time, so she decided she would set her own business up, and she now supplies an awful lot of the rowers with their food. And she did a lovely little sponsorship opportunity for a lot of the rowers. It was called A Message in a Meal. So if anybody logged onto the website, bought a meal for you, they could put a message in that you would only find out what the message was when you open it when you're at sea.
When you scoffed it.
Yeah, when I scoffed it. So, of course, what have my friends done? I've probably got 30 or 40 meals that are probably full of insults, because that's the sort of friend I am. It won't be all well done. It'll be,
It was always a highlight for me. Any of them, actually,
What was your favourite?
When I was apple pudding, custard and apple. Custard and apple.
Yeah, I've got loads
Absolute
of those.
winner.
Yeah. And what's the other one? Mac and cheese actually is a pretty top one, and some Indian ones as well. The Indian version meals. Yeah, I actually there are a lot I'm looking forward to.
I actually ran out of food, Martyn, which will amuse you, when rowing back from New York back to England. And so I was then passed over all this fresh food from, I bumped into a warship on the way back, HMS Cumberland.
Wow.
And I saw them on the horizon, and I radioed them, and I said, let lads, I'm running a bit short of grub. Can you, get any chance of a resupply? So this huge, British naval destroyer comes over, starts circling, and they put down the rib, the seaboat, and it comes over. They give me a medical first stop to see if I'm all there. And and they realize more or less I'm all right. And they go back, and I basically give them a menu of what I wanted. And so they come back with all this food, and I'm there, then they leave. And for the rest of the day, I'm unpacking, trying to stow all this food below deck, all fresh in tins.
Yeah.
And I get to the bottom of one of these boxes. There's this huge white parcel wrapped in a white ensign, the ship's white ensign.
Wow.
And unwrap it, and inside there's 5 steaks, 400 Benson and Hedges, and 5 magazines.
Be interesting, because you probably know that as part of the race, we occasionally will get visited by curious sailing boats, or occasionally the one of the 2 support yachts. But if we actually take any provisions from anybody passing, we would be disqualified from the race. To the extent you can't even dry your underpants on the mast, because that would be seen as wind assisted. So
sailing,
yeah. So no, but so much to look forward to, Olly.
No, so my record attempt would become assisted, or yeah. I lost my unassisted status when I took. Yeah. Exactly right.
But probably worth it.
And so let's have a look at what are the things you're most looking forward to, and what are you least looking forward to in the race, if there is anything to not enjoy, really.
I think I'm probably going to enjoy all of it. Some of it I'll probably only enjoy after I've got back on land. There'll be moments when the squeaky bum moments, I think is probably a polite way of saying it. But what am I most looking forward to? Well, it's actually sometimes that knowledge that there will be places on this journey where I am closer to people on the space station orbiting the planet than anybody else on land. I'm also looking forward to seeing the night sky, seeing the Milky Way in its full glory. It's very difficult, particularly in the UK, to find anywhere where you can view the night sky without the intrusion of ambient light. So to just be, I suppose, in that situation where all I can see around me is I suppose nature in all its glory is one of the things I'm really looking forward to. Yeah, seeing the fish, whatever, fantastic. But just the general experience of understanding what goes on in the ocean, nature. Conversely, what am I perhaps least looking forward to? And everybody says this, and I'm sure you know what I'm going to say. There will be a time, or several times, when I probably will have to get off the boat to clean some of the barnacles, the seaweed off the bottom, which will be slowing me down, or at least causing a bit too much drag. The thought of doing that, I just doesn't. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it until I actually have to do it. I have been off the boat on my own. I know what it's like, and yeah, I'm that generation where all you ever hear is that music, from Jaws. That.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody says it. Everybody says the minute they get in the water, they suddenly get very concerned about what's in the water with them and what's behind them. I'm sure it's going to happen to me, so it's going to be the quickest dip I'm ever going to have. And I even bought a ladder to make sure I don't get out quick. So that's probably the thing I'm least looking forward to.
At least the water will be quite warm where you're going to be.
Yeah, that's. I wouldn't do it if it was cold. I do have a dislike of. I know you. I think you did one. It was a Northwest Passage or something, or further up in the Arctic Circle, was it? Or
oh yeah, from Greenland to Scotland. We kayaked from Greenland to Scotland. Yeah,
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. That's just too cold for me. There's. I don't mind doing the endurance. I don't mind. The mental strain of it. I just want to be warm while I'm doing it. So. No, I don't really want to be cold. Don't mind being wet. Cold, not a real favourite of mine.
Not so much cold and wet, even worse.
Well, yeah.
My only swimming experience, because I was further north when I rowed, the growth on the hull wasn't too bad. But when I was trying to row around Antarctica, I was going so slowly for so many days that I thought I must have snagged a fishing net or fouled something on the hull. So I eventually steeled myself to swim and have a look under the hull, see if there was something caught on the rudder or something. And the day before, I'd seen a big pot of orca, 300 meters away, but 300 meters in the ocean isn't very far, right?
No, it's like next door, isn't it?
Yeah. And anyway, I tried to put them out of my mind and jumped in, and God, it was cold. And you also feel extra vulnerable when you're naked. So swimming there, just this, speck, you've gone from being a speck on the sea to being a speck in the sea, and just that extraordinary sense of vulnerability. You've stepped off your sort of precious life support bubble, which contains everything you need to live on, and you just jumped off it willingly, or voluntarily at least. Anyway, I tied myself, had a string around my waist, so I wouldn't drift away from the boat, and I was swimming around under the boat checking for barnacles, and it was surprisingly clear. And suddenly this thing touched my ankle, and my heart sort of exploded out of my chest. Span around and expected to see exactly your friend Jaws looking at me, and it was just the tether. It was it was the sort of loose end of the tether had just touched my foot. Well, fantastic, Martyn. We covered a lot of ground, and what a trip you've got coming up, and I think can't only be a better time to go than now, to escape COVID-ridden Britain and Europe, and set sail. Put to the oars, right? We should say, not set sail. Yeah. Obviously, beyond a hell of an adventure, I know you're raising money for some extremely worthy charities. Do you want to just give us a
my charity is actually quite a small charity. It's called Horse Herd, horseherd.com. They use horses for therapy. It's what people would probably know of as horse whispering. They provide that to quite a broad range of individuals and organizations. Ex-service personnel is probably a good example of that. Disadvantaged children or young people with mental issues. Why am I supporting them? Well, two reasons really. They have been incredibly supportive to me over the years. I've experienced some of their their horse-based therapy. I understand it. I think it's brilliant. They're a small charity. They're always struggling for funds. It's payback time as far as I'm concerned. So if I can raise any amount for them, but the bigger the better, so be it. I think a lot of the bigger charities are pretty well covered with a lot of other rowers or other adventures and so forth, but sometimes the smaller ones miss out. And people can follow Horseherd through horseherd.com, and they can follow my journey two ways. They can log on to the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge website, which I think is Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge.com. On that main website page, there is a race tracker app that will be available to download to anybody in about a week's time, that will show all of the race participants on a live digitized feed, little icon that you can see where everybody is and how far behind or far ahead. And there is my own website, which is atlanticsolo.co.uk, which will tell anybody who wants to know more about me and the charity as well. And of course, I'm always looking for support, financial for the row myself, but also for the charity. And a brief thanks to you guys at Arxon for supporting me in that challenge too. Thank you.
Well, great to speak to you, Martyn, and no, we're delighted at Arxon to be sponsoring such both a cracking adventure and also obviously a very worthy cause. Mixing up course and horse. So that's fantastic, and I think also we'll be running updates on the Arxon website as well, so people can see, check in on you there as well. But I think just remains for me to say thank you so much for giving us your time this evening, and massive good luck with the row.
Thank you.
Fair winds and following seas